Very good. Well, thanks, everyone. I'd like to say good evening and welcome to the South Carolina Botanical Garden. It's great to have this opportunity, one, to meet so many of you for the first time. My wife and I have been members of the Native Plant Society since we moved down in the summer of 2023. It was one of the first things we did was sign up because we are passionate conservationists. And I'd like to thank Heather and Rick for inviting me to speak tonight. This is, one of those opportunities that, one, I was really glad we could arrange this, but also glad we could actually host it here at the garden and give an opportunity for people in this area to have something in their own backyard they could come and see. So hopefully this is something we'll continue to do as part of our collaborations growing over the years. What I'm going to start out with is just a few slides, a little bit about me, because again, I haven't had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with everyone in the society yet. To just kind of give you an idea of where I've been, what I've been doing, and my link to plant conservation in particular. If we can get the technology to cooperate with the buttons, we'll be rolling now. So I'm a botanical horticulturist. And so what that means is I started off in horticulture learning plants from the outside in, and then I got more into botany, learning plants from the inside out. And so those of us that have studied on a botanical horticulture course kind of approach it that way, that we understand the art and science of horticulture, but also dip our toe into botany, taxonomy, and systematics. I'm really into woody plants. Trees and shrubs are the things that really hooked me and got me involved in horticulture as a young man. And I've had the opportunity to work in the temperate areas of the world and the tropics both, and love them equally, because the plant diversity that's out there, there's 350,000 species of plants on this planet. And I would like to get to know each one of them, but I know that's going to be a challenge. I've always had a really deep interest, as I said, in the art and the science of horticulture. And so being able to apply my trade in designing and building gardens and doing plant conservation work in tropical areas, in dense forests where you think no one else has ever set foot, has been, some of the joys of my life. And I've had the opportunity to do lab work as part of my PhD, genetics, cytology, understanding, from the smallest molecules of a plant right the way through to the whole plant and its propagation. So how did I sort of get to Kew, as Rick was alluding to? So I went to school in Kentucky, where I grew up on a small farm. I went to school in an ag department with an emphasis in horticulture was my degree. I always thought I was going to return to the family farm and grow specialty vegetables. And instead, I went on a horticulture trip to the local arboretum outside Louisville, Kentucky, a place named Bernheim Arboretum, you may have heard of, and found out someone would pay me to grow trees and shrubs, and that was it. While I was there, my professor took a group of us to Europe on a study tour. One of the last places we went was the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and I wound up meeting someone working in a glass house and found out they were a student. And when I returned to Kentucky, was speaking with my mentor at Bernheim, mentioned this to him, and because we'd been talking about what I might do next, and he said, "That's what you should do." And I sort of took it as a jest and then thought more about it and wound up getting a place on the course at Kew Gardens. And so this is a 3-year work study program. You get to work in all the different sections of Kew, all the different units. So I arrived and they put me in a tropical conservatory looking after bromeliads and aroids. I was a fish out of water. I just come from Kentucky working with big trees. But, it was a great support network, really, really wonderful staff there that gave me a lot of training and a lot of pampering, I would say, in those early days of learning what I needed to about tropical plants. But the course itself is a great opportunity for young people to get to see all the facets of horticulture. And you get marked on everything from the size of the tilth of your vegetable plot that you grow organically through to, major dissertation project gets you at the end of the course. And it was while I was here that I met my lovely wife, Michelle, and we had the opportunity to work together in the gardens, and then afterward, as both of our careers developed, on many, many projects. While I was a student, I got to do a couple of travel scholarships. The first one, I actually wrote to the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society, for a bursary to return to the U.S. I've always had a real passion for swamps, and cypress tupelo swamps are my happy place. So I wrote a bursary to come back and actually travel the entire extent of where bald cypress grows. So I started off in Kentucky and drove over into southern Illinois, where they begin, all the way down the Mississippi, across the Gulf, and then back up the East Coast all the way to Delaware. And it's got to see these plants in their native habitat, look at the plants that coexist with them. But I think the most important thing was I got to see the society that interacts with these places and the livelihoods that these swamps provide, and some of the cultural and societal issues that are out there that we need to deal with if we're going to conserve these places. The second trip was my first time to the Caribbean. So I applied for funding from the International Plant Propagators Society and a UK-based trust called the Merlin Trust. And I had the opportunity to go to the US and British Virgin Islands and to help local conservationists set up propagation facilities at their nurseries for what were at the time quite rare threatened species. And the picture in the bottom right corner of the screen, that's Xanthoxylum thomasianum, which is in the citrus family, and it's one of our federally listed species that occurs in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I've continued collaborating with folks from these organizations over the years. And that was through, after finishing the Q diploma, being recruited as a coordinator for a new program working in the UK overseas territories. So these are places around the globe that retain their links with the United Kingdom. The citizens are British passport holders, and they're some of the most isolated islands on the planet. Places you may have heard of like Gibraltar, Bermuda, and then more far-flung places like the Pitcairn Islands in the middle of the South Pacific. I've had the opportunity to travel to the South Atlantic and work in the Falkland Islands, right on the equator, on Ascension Island, and then a lot of work in the Caribbean. That was where the majority of my time was spent. But we did conservation projects in over 20 countries and territories over the years. And we got involved in everything from helping establish new botanic gardens to curation in existing gardens, baseline surveys of flora and fauna, collecting plant material for propagation, seeds for banking at Q's Millennium Seed Bank, and then bigger in situ projects where we did things like controlled fires in the Turks and Caicos Islands and their pine forests, and helping to develop management plans for species and habitats. My PhD work was at Birkbeck College at the University of London. I did this part-time alongside my full-time job. And I looked at a threatened shrub. It's currently now listed as a threatened species with the ESA here in the US because it occurs in Puerto Rico, and then jumps all the way in to the end of the bank in the British Virgin Islands. And so the work that I was doing was trying to understand its phylogeographic placement. So where is it in the big tree of life? And then what is the makeup of the populations in the wild? So population genetics. How important are these remaining isolated populations in the wild? And then through the years, continued working with this plant and actually expanded that out to look at flora and fauna interactions. And it was through that, and the reason this picture's here And I hope everyone didn't see the iguana. They actually saw the plant first. Got to in-plant blindness. But the baby iguana, this is a hatchling. So this little guy was captured when he hatched, taken to a Head Start facility because they have feral cats and dogs on this island that kill them, unfortunately. They let them get to a certain size, and then they can release them because they're big enough to fight off the cats in particular. And so you can see this little guy's got beads on his neck, and he had a radio tracker. He was released from the Head Start facility. The first plant he went to was this shrub, Veronia, that I worked with. And the first thing it did, ate the fruits off of it. And so that really proved to us that there was a strong link between this iguana and this threatened shrub. And on the islands where this shrub is not doing very well, the iguana's been extirpated. And so this is, one of those things that really highlights, you got to look at all the pieces of the ecosystem. You can't just put your blinders on and think about your plant. You got to worry about what's pollinating it, what's dispersing its seeds, and then thinking about climate change, because the island where this plant species is most abundant, the highest point on that island is only 25 feet above the sea level. And so impacts of climate change, particularly sea level rise and more intense hurricanes, is going to have a big impact on this plant. So after almost 20 years of living in the UK, I took a job here in the US, and Michelle and I will never again relocate internationally during a global pandemic. Don't recommend it. We did it once. But I took a job at the Oak Spring Garden Foundation, which is in Northern Virginia, about an hour west of Washington, D.C., as their head of plant garden and landscape programs. And this is the former residence of Rachel Bunny Mellon. It's a 700-acre property, was mainly horse farm, had her beautiful walled garden, very formal garden. And we began doing habitat restoration work, converting those horse pastures into wildflower meadows, establishing an arboretum, building a wildlife garden, and running programming. And all of this was happening, in this incredible landscape full of wildlife, impressive corridor network of protected lands through land trust protection. Conservation easements, they work. So if you own property, think about it. But one of the great things about this opportunity is we developed this new biodiversity team. And one of the first people that I wanted to hire was an entomologist. Because again, our insects are crashing, and we've got to do all we can to conserve them. And a lot of that comes down to our choices we make with plant material. And so that's something that you'll hear me talk about a little more in this evening's talk, is the importance of our plant choices. Native plant conservation really is significantly important for us to ensure our own survival. But after a couple of years at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, I really missed public gardens. That was where I'd spent the bulk of my career. Was in places open to the public where you're interacting with the public on a daily basis. And this opportunity I couldn't pass up. A 230-acre garden on the edge of a R1 research university. It's the envy of all the other botanic gardens at universities, because most of them are tiny, landlocked, no parking, no access. We've got all those things. And we're free and open to the public every day of the year. So it has a lot going for it. It also has a unique, I think, heritage about it of the way it's developed. Started off as a camellia garden and has developed today into a place that's known for its habitat displays. So it has a wonderful mix of forested areas full of currently a lot of invasives that we're working on. But a lot of native plants. And then we have these wonderful display areas where we can engage the public and teach them about the importance of what there is in their backyard. So here at the garden, we're focusing on native plants and controlling those invasives that I just mentioned. What we're trying to do is create habitat for native wildlife. and that kind of spans the spectrum. We're actively collecting seed and cuttings of native, rare, and threatened species that will get into our collections, and we'll use this material for display so we can get that out into the garden so people can understand it, learn it, research, and then distribution, because getting material out into the hands of other gardens and into public landscapes, is really important if we're going to conserve these species. And our focus on native plants is driven by the really stark numbers from the most recent State of the World's Plants and Fungi report. So this came out of Kew Gardens, researchers from over the globe, and of the 350,000 plus species of plants, 45% of our flowering plants are at risk of extinction in the wild. Let that sink in. Nearly half of all the plants, flowering plants on this planet, could go extinct in our lifetimes. And that's pretty shocking. There's some other really incredible figures. This is over the past decade, our knowledge of plants and what's going on with them in the wild has just astronomically shot up. And we're now able to put real figures on things like there are 220,000 plant species that only occur in one country. It's pretty phenomenal to think about. Some of these countries are large, but a lot of that diversity occurs in quite small areas on islands, and they are the litmus test for us. They're the canary in the coal mine because we're seeing their populations decline very rapidly. Here in South Carolina, we are very fortunate to have such a diverse flora. We've got around 2,800 native vascular plants, but 333 of those, and so luckily, it's a little lower than that global average, are considered priority species, things that we're most concerned about and we're tracking. And so those are within our State Wildlife Action Plan, and information is available for those of us working in conservation through the Natural Heritage Program. And then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife lists 23 federally listed species. So these are either threatened or endangered, and they have federal protections. But the protections for plants is different than protections for animals. And it's a very important thing for people to understand, because just because it's an ESA listed species, if it's on private land, there's no teeth. So it's got to be on public land or land that is going to utilize federal funding before there's any recourse for things happening to those plants. And it's a much different thing than the rules for animals. So we've got to be really concerned about losing these species. And then we've got another 19 species that are currently considered at risk. And so these are the ones that haven't gone through the process to either be federally listed or they haven't been successful yet. And they're things that we can do work on now to try to keep them from getting listed, from getting to that point that they actually need that much support. So I've got an example here of our mountain sweet pitcher plant. So if you go online, you can find lots of great information through the Natural Heritage Program. They use NatureServe Explorer's database to pull that information. You can search at the county level within the state. So I selected Pickens County. It told me this plant's here. You can find out all this great information about its state listing, its national listing. And I think, this is a great thing for you to explore, to even think about, what do you want to put your limited yard space toward? What's the most appropriate species that you could be growing in your own backyard that maybe are on that at-risk list, or things that we know there are need for conservation? And then here at the garden, we're really cultivating strategic partnerships. What we want to do is expand our local and our regional collaborations. And then we'll think about national and international. But right now we need to think locally in particular and really build up our connections. So here at the university level, Cooperative Extension Service, which the garden is part of the Cooperative Extension. So we sit within the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Life Sciences. And my boss is the head of Cooperative Extension for the state. So we have this automatic network of great collaborators in every county of this state. We have research and education centers spread across the state. There's 5 of those. And we have program teams doing horticulture, natural resources, water management. So we have a great network to work with, and I'll give you a few examples of what we're doing. But here at Clemson, we have a herbarium we're working closely with, and numerous researchers that are doing cutting edge conservation, habitat level work across the state and more widely. So one of the things that we've really focused on, and there's probably a few logos here you've never seen or heard of, and that's because they're very new. So the South Carolina Public Garden Alliance, we're founding members of this group. We had our first symposium earlier this year. Around 100 people came together from across the state, from different botanic gardens, arboreta, and even municipalities that are doing really high-level horticulture at Boone Hall Plantation for our first get-together. And this group's meeting monthly. The idea behind it is to get everyone involved in public horticulture connected so that we can share knowledge, experience. Where do you get your plants? Where do you get your soil? Where do you get your pots? All that really useful information, and use this network that we're building up. We're also founding members of a regional initiative, and I'll talk more about. But you see the Southeastern Native Seed Network logo on here. So this is probably one of its first outings. This is brand new logo. And this network, as I said, I'll talk more about, but it's enabling us across the Southeast to start really thinking about what we're prioritizing for seed collection, how we're thinking about ecoregions, and how we're going to get the right seed into the right place, into the right hands. Here in the state, we're also members of the SC Green industry. So we've been going to their meetings. They have a conference each year in January. And this is basically the entirety of the nursery trade and the landscape trade together. This year, I gave a presentation to them about trees in a changing climate. We've really got to be thinking about choices that we're making, what street trees we're planting, what trees we're selling in our nurseries. Because if we're not, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We need shade. It's getting hotter. And if we're not planting the right trees that are going to survive, then we're actually doing a disservice to those coming next. And then I've already mentioned the Natural Heritage Trust program. So we work very closely with the state botanist, Keith Bradley, and his team. One of the big things I think that's coming out of the botany and plant conservation program from the state is their prioritizing what species, and sharing that information with us. What species do they think we should be working on? What's not being looked at by other people? And we're receiving seeds from them, starting to grow those out in the nursery, and beginning to look at projects that we can do together. And then at the regional level, besides the Native Seed Network, is the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance. And so this is coordinated out of Georgia. The Plant Conservation Alliance has a national level, and then it's broke down at regional levels, much like the Seed Network is. And I'll talk more about the importance of that network and us at the state level really focusing in on that, because I think that's the key to us moving forward in so many areas with plant conservation in the state. So our public gardens, they really play a vital role in biodiversity conservation. And it's a multifaceted approach that we use. So we act as safe havens for rare and threatened plants by growing them outside their natural range, so what we call ex situ conservation. But we also support them in situ through habitat creation. In places like this garden, we actually have forested areas. We have native habitat here. Which is, again, quite rare for a lot of botanic gardens. Most of them don't have that. We're doing research and education work, developing propagation protocols for species and sharing that information out. But one of our biggest roles is that education component and community engagement. And so I'll talk a little more later about some of the programs that we run here at the garden. But, getting young people particularly involved, and great to see Bill here who helps out with a lot of our programming. Making sure that young people have the opportunities to engage with the natural world. So many people these days are disconnected. And they don't know where their food comes from. Some people don't care as long as it's at the grocery store. But we really have to engage people with that understanding of how important it is for us to conserve the natural world around us, because that's what supports us. And we can play a much more significant role in conserving our native plants. And I'm giving an example here of this integrated plant conservation model. So this is something that's been out for a number of years, but it's one of the things that we really have to grasp the nettle on, so to speak, because there are so many different ways that we can approach conservation. And oftentimes for any single species or habitat, it's not just one of those things that you've got to engage, because many species don't take to seed banking. Many species are very difficult to grow outside their natural range. And so making sure that we begin to look at each of these areas and figure out which ones we can leverage here at the garden and where we need to build partnerships to fill those gaps. Chances are we won't be doing tissue culture here anytime soon, but we have partner gardens that are. And so we send them material that we would like for them to get going for us. And so I mentioned ex situ, or outside natural range conservation, before. And the main point here is this is an insurance policy. So ideal situation is every plant is conserved in its natural habitat. But the reality is that's getting more and more difficult. In our quintessential development practices of going in, clearing everything down to bare clay, reforming the land, not a lot of our species are able to move back in those places naturally, or we automatically eliminate them and plant non-native grasses, non-native trees, and then pour the chemicals on. And so thinking about our habitats, we want to ensure that from an ex situ point of view, that we're leveraging our tool belt. And so what that means is that we've got a number of ways that we can perform ex situ conservation. And so seed banking is the most cost effective. It takes up the least space. It's not super high tech for a lot of plants. But the problem is not all things you can seed bank. So an oak tree, you can't seed bank an acorn. So those, what we call exceptional plants, you've got to start thinking about other ways to conserve them. And so that may be a mixture of options. So some plants are quite rare, they're hard to grow. We may have them in a collection or two on display at a garden. Other species we can grow in field gene banks, and actually have high quantities of them there that we can collect from to get those disseminated out. And then it gets much more complicated from that point. We can go into in vitro or tissue culture, which are growing plantlets on sterile agar media. Cryopreservation, which is come leaps and bounds, particularly in the past 10 years. And that's basically taking plant tissue, coating it in some way, and then putting it in liquid nitrogen for long-term storage. And that holds a lot of promise for us for some of these exceptional species, taking embryos from seeds and storing them in cryo. And then for some species, we have to think about pollen banking, especially a lot of our dioecious species, those that have male and female plants. They get really, really rare. And if they're not synchronized, you may have pollen produced one year and not have a receptive female plant for that pollen to go to. And so banking that pollen and then sharing it with other gardens so that they can use it when their plant is fertile down the road. And then DNA, the technology continues to amaze. It moves at such a rapid pace these days. But we're always, when we go out and we're documenting, taking herbarium specimens, we take DNA samples so that we've got material there that can be used to understand the tree of life. And who knows where that'll go in the future. I don't think we're going to be recreating dinosaurs, but having that material in the bank is useful. So we're part of some really important global consortia for the conservation of magnolias and the conservation of oaks. So these are two separate umbrella groups. The global consortia for the conservation of magnolia is coordinated out of Atlanta, and the one for oaks is coordinated out of the Morton Arboretum. There are many more of these, and they're all part of a broader group, the global consortia, which is headed up by the Botanic Gardens Conservation International. We're part of these networks. We're sharing plant material, and we're thinking about what we call meta collections. And so this is not just thinking about our own collection of plants, but it's thinking about all the collections and all the gardens and arboreta across the world, and ensuring that we're filling gaps in those collections so that we spread out the risk of losing them. And so through our involvement in the global consortia, we were invited, staff from here at the garden and extension participated in this meta collections management workshop in March in Atlanta Botanic Garden this year. And it brought together public garden conservationists from across the country to discuss the development of collections, meta collections, and using gap analysis to identify and inform our work. So basically, this process of gap analysis is developing a software package that you can input a species range and where we have collections from, and it'll identify where you need to go collect to fill those gaps in your meta collection. And we're using this technology now to inform the work that we're doing. So it's trying to move to that next level, to really prioritize and put our money in the right place and our time and resources so that we're not collecting material from the same places over and over and over again. And so one example of that is a project that we did last year on filling the gaps in conservation meta collection of Magnolia pyramidata, the pyramid magnolia. South Carolina is the very eastern extent for this species range, and it goes all the way to Texas. But it's very small little isolated pockets left of this tree. And we're working on this project with Atlanta Botanic Garden. The idea last year was to collect from Georgia and South Carolina because these are the two places that the gap analysis had identified with lacking collections. So we did field work last year. We were able to find trees in the wild, Congaree Bluffs kind of broader area. And from those trees, we took high resolution GPS points. We worked with private landowners to gain access. Really great help from Audubon, South Carolina to help make some of those introductions. And then both staff members from South Carolina Botanical Garden and Atlanta went on these field trips. And for some of our garden staff, it was the first time they'd been on a botanical expedition. And it meant that they got to see these trees that they were trying to grow here in the garden in the wild, in their natural habitat for the first time. And that's such a transformational thing to happen, because if you see a plant in the wild and you see its co-occurring species and the slope and the aspect and all those things, it helps you as a horticulturist to know what you need to do to grow those plants. So besides collecting data from the trees that we found, we collected DNA samples, herbarium vouchers, and shoot tips for tissue culture back at Atlanta. The cuttings we were able to get from both Georgia and South Carolina. And then we were able to identify trees and fruit here in South Carolina later in the year and collected those. The seed that we collected and stratified here at the garden, we sent to Atlanta, and they've had 85% germination success in their conservation nursery. So very, very glad to see these. The success of the project meant that we were able to apply for some follow-on funding. So we've continued this project this year, but we've included partners in Texas at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. So they're doing surveys at the very western extent of the species range in Texas. So we were back out in South Carolina in April, working with new private landowners. We actually took several of them out into the field so they could see the trees on their property, talk to them about the habitat, the importance of ensuring that we don't have escaped wildfires because these trees are super sensitive to fire. And, really trying to help them understand how significant, because we currently only know of 29 trees left in this state. And they're only on a couple of properties. And so these landowners, they are excited because we're excited and we're sharing that with them. But, it's really important for us to make sure that we're collecting this material, getting it into ex situ, and then sharing it out with partner gardens so that we've got this meta collection spread out. And then I'll highlight one more project, which is our Oglethorpe Oak program. Again, this is funding that we got from the American Public Garden Association and the U.S. Forest Service. And this project is focused on, again, really rare oak that we're very, very fortunate to have quite significant populations of here in South Carolina. We're the very northeastern extent for this species range. So we surveyed a lot of suitable habitat, mainly within Sumter National Forest. We found dozens and dozens of trees that had young acorns beginning to form on them. Again, high resolution GPS points were taken. And then the same, DNA samples, herbarium vouchers. We need proof that those trees were there. We need to put that into the research record. And so we took leaf shoot tip cuttings. Those are going back for tissue culture at Atlanta. And then later this year, we'll try to go and hopefully be able to collect acorns from these trees. And then those will get disseminated out to other gardens. One of the things that really concerned us in that photo in the middle at the top, so you can see the little developing acorns in the photo on the left. The next one over is a really big tree. That's probably 1.5 feet, nearly 2 feet across. And the discoloration on it are cankers or lesions, which is most likely caused by chestnut blight. And so we saw this extensively, and in some areas, it was almost every tree, and some of them were obviously had died from it. So this is a big concern to us. Interestingly, a lot of the trees in cultivation don't seem to get the blight. And so we don't know right now exactly what's driving that. So further research is needed. And then we're working with private landowners who have material, either wild or cultivated, of really rare plants on their own properties. One of our focal groups is our native Stewartias. One, they're beautiful. Two, they make great landscape plants. And three, they're quite threatened now in the wild. And so going out, surveying for these trees in the wild, collecting data, seed from them, and trying to get this material growing here at the garden so we can share it out and get it into suitable landscapes. We did a lot of seed collecting last year. We got thousands and thousands of seeds from many dozen different species. We're going to be developing protocols. So Michelle's team, she's got some interns that work with her. They're developing protocols on these species. You'll see a little more of that in just a minute. But we're always working to expand our network, to get new partners involved, new collaborations going. And again, thinking about these meta collections, sharing this material out with other gardens so we spread that risk. We're collecting from veteran trees like these big oaks on Clemson's campus. They've obviously got some good genes. They've been there a long time. They've been through a lot, hundreds of thousands of people walking on their roots. And then really spectacular specimens like this flowering dogwood on the Spartanburg Community College campus. It's one of the most spectacular dogwoods I've ever seen. So trying to target these plants, collect material from them, and get those growing so we can share them out. And they're all being grown here at the garden in peat-free media that we're sourcing from in-state. So this is media that's being produced from forest byproducts, compost, a bit of sand, and we're having great success with this. And it's all being grown under the banner. We got our SC certified accreditation. So it's grown here. And this is one of those things that we're really trying to promote, is this idea of a circular nursery economy in the state. This is a green economy that could do wonders for us from a plant conservation perspective if we can get this rolled out to more groups. But a few of the things that we're growing that'll be hopefully resilient in the future: red cedar, bald cypress, tulip poplar, white and live oaks, and then shortleaf and longleaf pines are some of the species that we're growing. And then some of the rarer plants that we're focused on, I've already mentioned Stewardia, but we're also growing a lot of Franklinia trees, though not strictly native to South Carolina, but very, very close. So this program, we want to keep an eye out for. We're planting out display gardens here so that people can see the use of natives in low maintenance and attractive landscapes. So this is a demonstration Carolina yard that we did last year, which is now coming into its own. It was used for filming part of a new backyard wildlife garden online course for Clemson's Cooperative Extension Service. So you can do this course and you'll get to see some of the shots of us doing the planting and planning for it. And then last week, this was used for a field day where groups came in that were studying the Carolina Yards curriculum and visited the garden as part of that. And I mentioned before our invasives problems. We've been very fortunate to secure 2 years of funding from the Forestry Commission, which is enabling us to dedicate a member of the team just to work on invasive plants. And so quite remarkable change you can see in that ground layer of Akebia and ivy, which was basically just smothering the floor of this part of the garden. So we're targeting areas that have heavy invasions, especially over the winter months when it's easier to do, and not worry about non-target impacts. And now as we move into the bulk of the growing season, we're doing really targeted fringe areas where you've got one or two of these things and we can get those individuals knocked out. And if you're interested, we're running a series of programs on controlling invasives. The next one will be on June the 12th from 10 to 1 here at the garden. So the garden's expanding its role in conserving priority plants and trying to help build up this nursery trade across the state. We've got a small seed bank that we've established here at the garden. We're actively collecting material for storage and future use. As I mentioned, Michelle's team are growing and evaluating, writing up protocols for species. That's what you see here in the bottom right corner, is doing a protocol for Baptisia. And really building this green economy idea, I think is one of the most important things. And it's something Rick and I have talked about a lot, is we all have plant sales. Where's that material coming from? You guys have had a really great model for others to look at because you're producing 100% in-house natives. I think we need to get that idea rolled out a little broader across the state. Our plant sale, the next one, just to save the date for you, this fall, we're growing more and more in-house to have at that sale. We're not 100% native, but we do have a lot of great material. Excuse me. I also want to flag our Friends of the Garden program. If you're interested in learning more about this, have a look at our website. One of the things I'll point out is we have through this Friends program is a reciprocal entry to gardens across the U.S. and a few internationally. It's a great way to keep in touch with us because you get our friends membership. The garden's gate comes out quarterly. We send around these wonderful What's Blooming emails. And it gives you first access and reduced entry to a lot of the programs that we run. So we've got everything from kids programs like our summer camps, which will be starting soon, junior naturalist programs that we run, right the way through to adult programs. And our flagship plant conservation program is the South Carolina Native Plant Certificate, which is a partnership with the Native Plant Society. And, for me, this is just an ideal series of classes that if you're interested in plant conservation and learning about the habitats of South Carolina, you got to do this course. And Rick's one of our featured speakers. So earlier this year, I mentioned Rick, Michelle, and I are involved in this Southeastern Native Seed Network. We had the opportunity to travel to Tucson to be involved in the National Native Seed Meeting. And it was an opportunity for us to get together with many people for the first time that we've been seeing on these little Zoom screens for months. And to hear from partners and colleagues that have been working in this realm for some of them for decades, particularly out west. And to see how they've been able to develop these networks and really move the needle on plant conservation in their states. As an example, in Texas, they went from much like we have here in South Carolina, a 50% native, 50% non-native DOT roadway mix to a 100% native roadside mix because they built an industry in Texas growing native plant seeds that they can use. And so, this is one of the things that we're really keen to look at with the Department of Agriculture is this potential for us to build up, basically row cropping, but growing native seeds. So I hope it's apparent through the course of this talk about this close relationship that we have with the South Carolina Native Plant Society and the South Carolina Botanical Garden. We meet regularly. We've been talking about all these opportunities that we have, ways to grow this partnership. And the real key areas of the discussion are really how at the state level, we apply to those umbrella groups that are working across the region. And I think the two key ones, besides the Native Seed Network that we've been talking about, is developing a South Carolina Plant Conservation Alliance. So this is something that had a start in the past, and I think really suffered through the pandemic. But the key thing here is we've got to get a coordinator that is a full-time funded position that can focus in on running a PCA for the state. So many of the things that are going on, if we had a coordinator that could help keep everybody in the loop about what was happening with all the different organizations and engage with the state agencies. We have such a great example. The Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance is mind-blowing. Michelle and I went to their symposium and our mouths hit the floor. They had folks from the Department of Transportation doing presentations on the roadside plant conservation work they're doing in Georgia. We've got a long way to go to get there. And with the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, a short time to do it. And so this is one of the areas where we're spending a lot of our effort is trying to figure out how we move the needle on this Plant Conservation Alliance. So I want to end with a thought by sharing an excerpt from Andrea Kramer and co-authors' report on conserving North America's threatened plants. So they say that plants are not optional. They are essential to all life. I personally think this is a message that is either misunderstood or more frequently and sadly is not really well thought through. People don't really get it, how important plants are to their daily life. And so my own reflection on this is that beyond all those life-enriching experiences that we have of going out and spending time with plants in these habitats, growing our own vegetable garden that we can that we can eat those things that come out of it. At the end of the day, we need plants to survive, and therefore we have to ensure their survival. So thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
So these questions from the room, usually with Zoom, it's easier if people just type their questions. I'll share them with you and you can repeat back, and that will also reduce the need for the owl potential weirdness. So stay unmuted.
Sound good. Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Martin. I have a question regarding the funding that the university provides for the Botanical Garden. And I asked that because I received an email from Tony Avan, who was concerned about the state of the garden in the aftermath of Patrick leaving. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so the university provides funding through the garden, basically through two directions. We get some of our funding from effectively the provost's office, the education grant. And then we get some of our funding through public service and agriculture, which comes through the college and cooperative extension. And then the rest of our funding is a really complicated mix of self-generated revenue, existing gifts and endowments that we have. And one of the big things that we're trying to do now is figure out how to grow those areas. Because unfortunately, when the garden was established and became the State Botanical Garden in 1992, there wasn't a budget line established in the state budget for the garden. And you know, that's one of my goals really is to try to get us to that point, that this garden, like other gardens that are state botanic gardens, particularly in the Southeast, is that we have a budget line. You know, we are understood to be a necessity. You know, and I think that's one of the ways that, you know, through the things that we've been talking about tonight, the importance of these collaborations, these partnerships, looking at these regional networks that we can use as a model of how it works other places and what we should be doing here. I think that's one of the ways that we'll hopefully get some traction on that. But the other is, you know, through the Friends program, through our philanthropic donations that we get. You know, we've been very fortunate. We've had a couple of private donors have stepped up in the last 2 years and have given endowments to help support certain areas of the garden. But our real need is to fund our general endowment. That's the thing that really this garden needs, is to have that self-sufficiency through its endowment to be able to keep the lights on and the staff paid. Because, you know, I'll just put it in this context to you. We have 230 acres. And right now we have 5 area managers, 5 full-time equivalent positions that are responsible for that 230 acres. The rest of it is seasonal work, students, either student workers or interns, and volunteers. You know, and it's very hard for such a small group of people to be able to adequately maintain this place, develop and maintain a volunteer program. And then on the other side, we've got 3 wonderful educators here that do all of these programs that I've been talking about, a group of 3. And then on the business side, we've got 2 people that are handling all the bookings, all the revenue things, all the weddings that happen here, all those things. You know, so it's a really small team. And that's, I think for me, we've got opportunities to build those revenue streams. But it's going to mean that we also need the community to invest in the garden. And so we've developed a new business membership program through our Friends of the Garden program, which is new. And this year we're rolling out a student membership for the first time.
Senator Thomas Alexander about getting your line on him.
I haven't personally directly approached anyone in the legislature yet. You know, my real focus over this first kind of almost 2 years has been to try to understand what we need, because I don't want to make an ask and it not be enough, or it be unrealistic. You know, so that's really what we've been focused in on. And I have to say, you know, the university, many of you that visit the garden will have seen the new equipment, will be aware of the new staff members that we've been able to get in the last year in particular. You know, so there has been investment from the university, and particularly from Cooperative Extension Service, directing one-time state funds to help us put in new IT. So we actually have video conferencing capabilities now in 3 buildings, whereas before we had none. And buy the equipment that was needed to, you know, if you've seen the little mini dump trucks that we've got, those have revolutionized work at the garden, and everyone loves driving them.
Yeah, I have questions on here. What was the website that had the information about endangered species of plants?
I will go back and grab that and put it in the chat. But it's the Natural Heritage Program. The Natural Heritage Program is through DNR. Yeah. So you can go to our events page, or you can scan the QR code that I made for it.
Other question from Zoom. Can you send me these slides, or are these proprietary?
I won't be sharing the slides, all of them.
Okay.
Because there are lots of images in here that aren't mine, a lot of our colleagues' images.
Got it. It is being recorded and it will be on YouTube.
Yep, that's fine.
So that I just said I would ask that. And then the other question was, can you talk a little bit more about what is a conservation easement? If I know someone who I think could benefit from knowing more about conservation easements, who should I put them in contact?
Natural Land Trust.
Yep, Natural Land Trust.
But can you speak a little bit more about what it is? General.
Yeah, so there's a number of different groups that will help landowners put their property into conservation easement. And it varies on what you want that to look like. You can be very restrictive and say, I don't want any further development on this land. There, you know, you can't modify footprints of the existing buildings, through to, I just want to make sure that this corridor through the property remains undeveloped. You know, so there's lots of variation there in that. But one of the most important things is it commits that land to preservation. And some people view that negatively, and they think that it decreases value, and other people look at it the exact opposite. And they understand the importance of ensuring those corridors, and that there won't be a house right on top of you in the future.
Upstate forever. Well,
Okay.
Yep. Upstate forever.
And we have a huge warehouse area across the street from us, a subdivision on the edge of our property, and less than a mile down the street of the new Amazon distribution center. I'm really, really worried. Is there some way we can help prevent this, or have some sort of tax incentive for businesses that they would get if they would be mindful of native plants and things like that? Has anybody ever proposed anything like that? You know,
Well, and I'll hand over to Rick in just a moment, because he can speak to a current bill that's going on in the legislature. But, you know, the biggest thing is your vote counts. Your vote matters. and reaching out, and making your voice heard, it's very easy to think, well, nobody's going to listen if I've complained, but if everybody complains, people will listen, and we saw this in Northern Virginia, that area we were in was, massive development happening for the data centers and the noise pollution and the exhaust pollution and all the rest that was coming with it. And a lot of the communities, they thought, there's so much money, we're not going to stop any of this, but they banded together and they did make a difference, and they convinced some of the landowners to put their properties that were potentially going to be developed into easements. So it can happen, but it's going to take all of us.
Before we jump into the bill, I know Rick will stand up and get it passed. Someone asked, have you folks done any work with aeroponic vegetation propagation? If one of us said, here's $1,000 for you to try something risky, what would you do with it?
So aeroponics, I guess is what they're maybe asking. Yeah, when I was growing up and went to Epcot Center and you saw the plants going around on the conveyor belt with getting sprayed and the roots just hanging there. And now they've shrunk that down into, things you can put in your patio or inside your kitchen window, to grow plants that way. So a lot of herbs and leafy greens are being produced that way. For plant conservation, it's not really a setup that we would use because unless we just couldn't keep those plants alive in soil for some reason, and then they're probably going to go extinct anyway. Using that approach, because what we're trying to do is grow restoration ready plants. So things that are tough and you can put in the ground and they will survive. So, that end of the spectrum of using hydroponics or aeroponics to produce plants from a conservation perspective is not really the thing that we would do.
On a couple of your slides, I think before this one, you had a garden that was started, and then you showed the following year it out. Can people go to that, and where is it?
Yeah, that's right next to the Fran Hansen Visitor Center. So where our gift shop and visitor center is located, that's on the terrace right next to it.
Yes, it's actually also about this. So this summer I get the pleasure to do some landscape plans for developments, trying to make the ones that are inevitable a little bit more sustainable. What's a good resource for, being able to take a list of plants to a customer that are native and restoration ready?
So you should have been at my talk this past weekend at the Erskine Flower and Garden Show, where I talked about gardening for biodiversity. The Native Plant Society Native Plant Database is a wonderful starting point, which is a link to Cooperative Extension's Carolina Yards program. Other websites I would recommend, Wild Ones. They produce a series of example landscapes with species lists. We don't have one for South Carolina yet, but the nearest one is a Piedmont design that's made for Greensboro, North Carolina. So it's close enough. The Audubon Society's Plant Finder. You put your zip code in and it gives you a list of plants based on your zip code. It's very much focused on and uses Dr. Doug Tallamy's research. So it provides a list of the moths and butterflies that utilize those plants and then produce caterpillars, which the birds feed on. And South Carolina Wildlife Federation also has a native plant list. It's not refinable, but it will it will give you a list of native plants to the state and what other wildlife they support. So amongst those, you can get a pretty good list. And I think the most useful one is the Native Plant Society. So like if you do a search on Piedmont, you'll get a list of 187 plants for our area, and then you can refine it.
Single handout back there.
Yeah.
Oh, and it, you got
There you go.
that one right there. Yep.
So there was a handout in the back of the room.
Yeah.
They're sharing.
To encourage the reciprocal green industry, are you promoting small nurseries to start growing more natives outside of the annual sales? Maybe landscapers being taught how to design with them?
Yeah, so Cooperative Extension has a certified landscape professional program that they're doing. We at the garden specifically, we've applied for a block grant from the state. One of the things we want to start to do is to produce liners. So do the research to be able to produce liners of things that aren't currently in the trade that we think should be. Because that's one of the biggest impediments is the nursery trade itself. If it's easy to propagate, they will grow it. If it's going to take a lot of R&D on their end to develop it and to be able to propagate it, and particularly trying to grow stuff from seed that nobody knows how, if it takes multiple years of stratification, all these things. And so that's some of what we're looking at now is trying to figure out, are there shortcuts? Michelle's been trialing leaving things in the fridge longer or pulling them out of the fridge in the middle of winter and putting them in a hot greenhouse. So trying to trick them into thinking they've been through another growing season and see if we can cut down some of those windows. But I think the biggest thing is, a lot of the bread and butter plants that are in the landscape trade are there because they're easy to prop and they're rock solid growers in a production setting. And that's often our biggest challenge is getting these natives to that point, especially if we're trying to grow species level seed grown material. We're always going to struggle with trying to keep up with the landscape trade. And so I think one of the biggest things that we're trying to do is encourage the use of resilient species that are appropriate for our landscape. And if we can get past that hurdle first and try to cut out some of the stuff that's being grown from so far away that we don't know the provenance of, shipped across the country in peat soils, if we can get through some of that and try to get more material grown locally in compost that's being produced in the state, from a sustainability point of view, that would be a huge win.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Rick.